Welcome back to Bizarre Books, the channel where I narrate the books that no one else will. Some may find content from this channel disturbing, so viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you derive value from this channel and want to support my efforts, please consider donating via the links provided in the description below this video. If you do donate, you can request a specific book or chapter that you'd like to hear me narrate. The Gates of Janus by Brady, Chapter 3. This truth within thy mind rehearse, that in a boundless universe is boundless better, boundless worse. Tennyson, 1809 to 1892. Deep thought is anathema to most people. They are too self-absorbed, too deeply immersed in their own immediate appetites and mundane problems to exercise a spark of originality or a capacity for extended, abstract cogitation, and are content to regurgitate second-hand or generally popular opinion. Such people seek safety in the stale clichés and platitudes programmed into them since childhood. Television interviews with the so-called average man in the street suggest that he is facile in almost every respect, prone to say what he believes nice people would expect him to say, displaying a social awareness that would flatter Attila the Hun, in effect an aspiring clone. If you disagree with this general assessment, perhaps you should think again. We all believe we are unique. Relatively speaking, that is of course correct. Likewise, we may regard someone as a character, but that does not necessarily mean that they possess character. Many serial killers think in terms of such adverse value distinction all the time. Their superiority complex is, it could be argued, paradoxically, a symbol of inferiority, a closed mind, almost completely self-consumed. Insular in a psychopathic or psychotic stasis. They, much like patronizing politicians, can pass public muster but privately devalue others around them by habit or reflex. They regard people generally as obstacles to be surmounted by all available means. Their victims appreciated intrinsically as existential commodities. Quote, "Good morning, sir. Why have you put out your lamp?" "Those are the orders," replied the lamplighter. "Good morning. What are the orders?" "The orders are that I put out my lamp. Good evening." And he lighted his lamp again. "And why have you just lighted it again?" "Those are the orders," replied the lamplighter. "I do not understand," said the little prince. "There is nothing to understand," said the lamplighter. "Orders are orders. Good morning." And he put out his lamp. End quote. The Little Prince. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Policemen, penal psychiatrists, prison guards, pulp authors, TV crime pundits, newspaper reporters and other failed academics and social misfits who make a profitable, parasitic living from the crimes of others may condescendingly claim special insight into the criminal mind. And why not? Since they have no doubt vicariously enjoyed committing every crime under the sun in thought and spirit themselves, and perhaps many in actuality. Those who make a respectable living from crime are in many respects more corrupt, culpable, and self-deluded than the criminals themselves. Therefore, by virtue of extensive study on the human animal, I might counterclaim insight into the mind of the serial academic and commercial crime scavenger, the self-appointed scholastic expert but practical amateur, or the penal dustbin men, too inadequate to make a living in the real world, bolstering their insecurity by locking people up. Policemen who lack the intellect and nerve to commit their own crimes, but feel free to steal and extort stolen money from criminals. And last but beastlier, the local and national politicians, who graft a career from loudly condemning criminals and crime. As a general rule, the more corrupt a politician is, the more vociferously they condemn and exploit criminals to divert attention from their own iniquity. In short, corrupt police, judges, lawyers, customs men, etc., who are on the take are not particular whether their bribes originate from drugs, prostitution, gambling, robbery, extortion, or whatever other criminal pursuit, so long as the dirt doesn't show under their nails. Second-rate authors and journalists hacking towards media prominence via the serial killer risk nothing by the encouragement of crime through commercial exploitation and sensationalism. Like tail notes to a comet, they seek by association to share the historical longevity certain serial killers achieve in the collective subconscious. Academics in this category, resenting dependency upon the savage, transmute their salacious guilt and lack of self-esteem into the sanctimonious vilification of the serial killer, chosen as their personal vehicle to fame and fortune. Police chiefs are subject to the same self-aggrandizement syndrome, habitually fighting amongst themselves, not only to claim major personal credit for capturing the serial killer, but also to cash in by having a book ghostwritten about their own imaginary powers of detection, though in reality most criminals are caught through police informers. Even eminent judges jostle unashamedly for the distinction of trying particularly notorious murderers, hoping to be remembered in something other than infrequently read dusty tomes of jurisprudence. Such is the competitive alchemy of fame and infamy, the stroke of a bloody axe often outliving that of the pen. As previously intimated, the serial killer is unavoidably a failure in many normal walks of life, particularly if stoical acceptance of tedious subsistence is the prime criterion commonly sought and admired. He lacks the patience to compromise and bear the stultifying lassitude of ordinary modern life. He, or she, though women's lib prefers to claim less than equality in the field of murder, wants more now, without wasting time on social decorum or strategy, in what is clearly perceived an extremely uncertain and short life. This acute awareness in the serial killer of precious time passing creates an existential urgency which counterproductively sublimates the knowledge that one mistake may deprive him of life, or terminate the freedom he hungers to exercise. In actuality, subconsciously or consciously, the serial killer has emotionally chosen to live one day as a lion rather than decades as a sheep. Once he believes that if he does not determine his own destiny, some fool will determine it for him, the dice cannot be recalled. Legality and morality are transmuted almost magically beyond strictly irrelevant human barriers. No one had better try to hinder his riding roughshod over such impediments to existential fulfillment. He has declared war. Psychologically, there may be some social conditioning which still hinders his obsessive and therefore contradictory quest for spontaneity. A deliberating metaphysical impulse may still stubbornly inhabit his subconscious. An impulse which paradoxically compels him to openly challenge a supreme being he consciously does not believe exists, and, in some instances, may wish did, so that he might either smite the antithetic deity directly, or beg for a forgiveness he would never stoop to ask of man. At this initial stage, some serial killers may still retain the common human tendency to luxuriate in fear-induced guilt. But once the killer has committed the first or second act of homicide, unchallenged by any divine or increasingly contemptible secular power, he will gradually accept his own acts as normal or supranormal, and those of the rest of humanity as subnormal and weak. He will, in effect, begin to regard society in much the same way as professional soldiers do an enemy state. He has created a microcosmic state of his own, in which he alone governs, becoming as careless with other people's lives as are most rulers. The serial killer perhaps attains a degree of amoral, ruthless detachment on par with, say, a state security doctor employed to ensure a prisoner under torture does not die before divulging the information sought. By a process of logical extension, the killer sees himself as following the example of society's legalized killers, only freelance. But he considers himself superior to legal killers in that he accepts responsibility and the risk of penalty from which the officially sanctioned are exempt. He might also validly come to the conclusion that crime is a logical variant of capitalist free enterprise, simply a lucrative and often exciting form of illegal self-employment. I personally can testify to having had boundless energy for criminal pursuits, just like any avid businessman could work from dawn till dusk on projects offering high financial or existential rewards. Crime is a natural extension of laissez-faire culture. Having a passion for travel, my long journeys from city to city to recruit and organise the required labour and logistics of a crime were acutely stimulating, an aesthetic bonus. I particularly enjoyed the old-world romanticism of travelling by steam locomotive, and the mysterious sooty atmosphere of railway stations, vibrant with bustle and purpose. I also experienced a unique sense of license when taking anonymous possession of a fresh city from which I would be departing the same night, the kinetic panache of total possibility. Several authors independently likened my passion for travel and certain other traits and characteristics to that of Stavrogin, the pivotal character in Dostoevsky's novel The Possessed, aka The Devils, a satire on the revolutionary mind. Whether the comparison holds any validity or truth does not trouble me, one way or the other, and in fact affords the opportunity to underline some salient psychological points, being an ardent admirer of all Dostoevsky's works and their unique psychological depths. Most intelligent people have the tendency to believe they are masters of their own destiny to a greater or lesser degree. As to whether this concomitantly signifies a greater or lesser degree of insanity or sanity is an imponderable to other than the willfully blind. Further, whether any individual's beliefs are considered sane or insane by others is of no basic relevance to the individual concerned. Peripherally, we all change with time, but the deeply held central beliefs forming the gravitational core of each unique personality rarely undergo significant modification. Whole nations and individuals regularly defend their beliefs to the death. Sometimes the victors are admired and venerated, sometimes the defeated. Transient historical perspective is as fickle and modish as morality and legality, sanity and insanity. Acceptance of society's idiosyncratic norms can be accounted a virtue one moment, a crime the next, and only the individual has the supreme right to decide which, and accept the consequences of his or her considered acts. The visionary or dissident is more admirable than the conformist or social hypocrite. The same can be said of Stavrogin, regardless whether or not his actions are generally pronounced selfish, irrational, immoral, or criminal. He at least holds the interest in being uncommon. The compliant have always been more stimulated by criminals than saints, preferring the intoxication of wine to the bland sustenance of milk. Without temptation, what value virtue? Quote, "Ye who suffer, suffer from yourself. No one else compels." End quote. Buddha. Stavrogin cannot tolerate ordinary existence. He turns life into a cartoon where anything is possible, experiencing only scorn for the followers he is turning into caricatures, revelling in the absurdity that they take his revolutionary games seriously, even to the extent of risking their lives. Thirsting to believe in something, Stavrogin is incapable of believing in anything, and finds life meaningless. In effect, preferring to accept no hope to false hope. This colours his every action, yet paradoxically fails to deprive him of the ability to inspire hope in his followers. Negative dynamism creating positive effect. The author Colin Wilson In his brilliant but derivative literary critique, The Outsider misconceives important aspects of meaning and motivation in The Possessed. His interpretations seem more concerned with reflecting his personal, somewhat eccentric philosophical ideas, which lack the eclectic elasticity of moral relativism. In addition, he has deficient grasp of the necessary multidimensional psychic factors of empirical thought required to conduct a comprehensive diagnostic into such matters. Wilson's obsession with writing about murder, outsiders, and criminals is perhaps subconsciously explained by the fact that his own beliefs and opinions are surprisingly mundane and lacking in controversy, and he has never used his writings or influence to champion a social cause. Making a lucrative living from criminals and their crimes should engender a guilt complex, yet he appears to possess no moral scruples about demeaning the victims of the crime by lovingly describing every horrific and intimate forensic detail of their final moments. Some authors invariably rationalize their prurient intrusion in the name of science and the furtherance of human illumination. I believe most serious students can discern when that line has been crossed and morbid sensationalism begins. Having proclaimed himself a genius suggests psychotic overtones, and perhaps because of this, Colin Wilson apparently fails to appreciate and extrapolate the importance of psychotic influence in The Possessed, the very title echoing it, and states that great criminals and gorillas turn out to be mindless Freudian neurotics, a rather disturbing hypothesis when one discovers that the majority of present world leaders, particularly in the Third World, were former terrorists. Conversely, the political doctrines and actions of many of the more exalted world luminaries in the West are frequently, and often justifiably, termed criminal by the politically or socially informed and eminent intellectuals. From 3 decades of practical study, I have found that it is generally applicable, especially amongst the vast majority of lesser criminals who can be described as inadequate, that life imitates art. The film actors do not act like gangsters. The gangsters act like their film counterparts. By externalizing dreams and modelling themselves upon celluloid images and stage projections, they effectively alter and lose touch with reality, increasing their chances of apprehension. Essentially, such aspiring criminals fail to develop sufficiently the third eye and ear, consequently creating a personal microcosm with insufficient pragmatic defences. Further, it is facile to use the word Freudian neurotic in a blanket derogatory context. Neurosis is an innate survival mechanism. Only when developed to a morbid degree is it regarded as detrimental and the seed of psychosis. Psychoneurosis also nurtures a predisposition to dissociative reaction, surrender to irresistible impulse, a state of temporary insanity. I am certain that even seasoned psychopathic and particularly psychotic serial killers can fall prey to dissociative reaction, faced with a victim so physically attractive or psychologically appealing that they literally cannot resist the impulse to attack. Stavrogin's erratic social behaviour, his impulsive physical attacks of varying categories on others, can certainly be classified as psychotic episodes. Wilson seems unable to appreciate or make allowances for altered states of affective mental aberration, and invariably applies a narrow philosophical or moral criteria, thus demonizing rather than apprehending. Outsider tendencies can be attributed to many fluctuating psychological imponderables, devoid of philosophical rationale. Without willing to pathologize, Stavrogin is more the victim of his impulses than Wilson will allow him to be. He examines Stavrogin from the outside rather than attempting to enter and look out from within. Stavrogin is an open book to those who have shared his psychic experiences. Impulsiveness is not a conscious act, therefore Stavrogin's spontaneous frolics into criminal mode are essentially reflexes lacking in thought, self-interest, or strategic intent, more a satisfying of primal appetite. Stavrogin's real crime is his inability to curb antisocial impulses. Criminals can be as impulsively good or evil as the normal person, but are, for expedient social and political motives, always defined exclusively by their evil acts. The Byrons and Rimbauds escape criminal categorization by merit of accepted artistic genius. Politicians and amoral officialdom escape by merit of power. Most common criminals possess neither of these social absolvers, and the type of serial killer whose determined crimes lead to notoriety regard their acts as justifiable within the framework of their hidden agenda and do not seek to require the absolution of others who live by a different credo. Whether their acts might be interpreted by an opposing culture as insane or depraved is, as already indicated, of no consequence to them. It is not that they lack a morality, but that they believe in a strikingly different and individual form. Even amorality is a mode of morality. Wittgenstein's struggle with language exemplifies its eternal paradox. The word psychopath is a case in point. Ask most people to define the word, and the majority will, thanks to the mass media, pulp fiction, and decades of film and other theatrical depictions, immediately opt for killer. This is erroneous. Further on, I shall deal with the essential personality traits and characteristics of the criminal psychopath and psychotic, but I now take the opportunity to define briefly the identical psychopathic traits and characteristics shared by both the criminal psychopath and the socially acceptable psychopath. It should be noted that this book deals with serial killers, therefore future use of the term psychopath throughout, I shall be referring exclusively to the psychopathic killer. If I were writing about habitual criminals other than killers, application of the term would be in context to whatever type of habitual criminal behaviour was being dealt with. For the word psychopath can be applicable to all forms of habitual criminal and antisocial behaviour. As the term psychopath defines an affective form of deep-seated personality disorder, its valid application is not confined solely to the so-called criminal classes. There are many ways to commit all crimes, murder included, without the least danger of being caught or even having one's actions branded criminal. In the field of devious criminality, the socially acceptable psychopath reigns supreme. Such socially acceptable, highly successful psychopaths are in fact common in the upper echelons of every society, for it is that very state of mind that helps them to succeed in the first instance. It is the psychotic who is out of tune with reality, not the psychopath. It is the psychotic who is legally termed insane, not the psychopath. Each one of you, whether high or low, regularly rubs shoulders with socially acceptable clinical psychopaths every day without the least awareness, not only accepting them as normal, but also as people to be admired and highly respected by virtue of their success and positions of authority. But, should you look beyond their prestigious trappings and study their personality traits and characteristics, you would find it quite easy to identify the socially acceptable psychopaths amongst you. Beneath the exterior of self-serving charm and urbanity, which most psychopaths can usually switch on and off at will, the crocodile smile, which doesn't quite vitalize the eyes, there exists only negative emotions, of which all are primarily concerned with personal ambition and the will to power. The most salient traits and characteristics of the psychopath are coldness, calculation, manipulation, lack of sensitivity, natural deviousness, facile mendacity, amorality presented as moral flexibility, pathological anger and envy rationalized as altruism or logic, all-encompassing greed, assumption of personal superiority over others, a dictatorial and bullying attitude relying on power and authority rather than intelligence, suspicion and lack of trust to a paranoid degree, inexorable ruthlessness, an egocentric conviction that they are always right, sexual promiscuousness, complete lack of remorse. These traits and characteristics are most likely to surface unwittingly when the psychopath is contradicted, frustrated, or blocked. Does any combination of these salient features of the psychopathic personality remind you of someone in your household? A relative or friend? A person at your workplace? A politician? A bureaucrat? Some minor official? A judge? A teacher? An author or journalist? A member of the armed forces or the police? Some person with practically everything they could possibly need but who always wants more? Or even yourself? Research into psychopathology, conducted by psychiatrists and psychologists, is almost exclusively based on selected captives, imprisoned, failed psychopaths who have not had the high measure of power, authority, and privileged opportunity requisite to inflict upon society the same degree of widespread damage of which the socially acceptable psychopath is capable on a daily basis. Naturally, the psychopathic elite are in an almost unassailable position to refute any charge or suggestion of mental abnormality. Even in the unlikely event of such powerful people agreeing to psychiatric examination, they would certainly ensure their eminent lawyers and personal doctors would, by application of every threat in existence, silence and squash any adverse diagnosis. As indicated, the whole of society, backed by the power of the mass media, is geared to concentrate public attention and hostility upon the captured, relatively small-time psychopaths, and particularly serial killers, using them as popular entertainment to distract public scrutiny from the infinitely more dangerous, socially acceptable psychopaths who hold high office throughout society. Governments have always employed socially acceptable psychopaths to good effect, particularly in the special armed forces and intelligence services, and, of course, expediently present the actions of such special servants as being for the good of the country and the people. America, forever glorifying in its international reputation as a democracy, employs the largest army of security or secret police in the Western Hemisphere. The FBI, the CIA, the NSA, undercover civilian police, SWAT riot squads, special service units, the National Guard, state troopers, etc., etc. To safeguard its international commercial empire, the government frequently uses naked aggression, employing the CIA to destabilize foreign countries not subservient to American foreign policy or influence, and replacing democratically elected governments with American-financed military dictatorships. Axiomatically, a crucial sector of the American economy is based upon a thriving arms industry. When Henry Kissinger publicly announced, "It is not economically feasible for America to end the war in Vietnam at this present moment," there was no public outcry at the clear implication that, faced with the choice of scaling down the American arms industry or continuing to allow thousands of its own and foreign nationals to be slaughtered weekly, the latter course was preferable. And when President Nixon was carpet-bombing Cambodia for many months while solemnly assuring the American people he was not, there was insufficient moral concern within the political establishment to demand impeachment. Shareholders, executive technicians, and labourers in the arms industry exemplify the zoological fact that any form of mass destruction is perfectly acceptable to respectable people, so long as they earn good, honest living by it. Not guns or butter, but guns for butter. Any government which, at any given time in office, necessitates law enforcement agencies to protect it from the majority of the people is not a government for and by the people. Any law enforcement agency which protects a government at any given time in office against the majority of the people cannot be for the people. Study your leaders more, your prisoners less. Be more concerned about the beliefs of the inquisitor rather than those of the heretic. The barbarity and power of the state thrives upon lack of public understanding and organised repudiation. End of chapter 3.